Most of the time, when you spot a wild animal by the roadside, it's already too late. But what if, just this once, someone stopped? What if, instead of looking away, a person decided to listen to what the forest was quietly trying to say? On a forgotten road in a small town, where time moves slow, a lone cop found more than just an injured animal. He found a calling. There were no cries for help, no loud pleas. Just a tiny bobcat, barely hanging on, lying among dry leaves, as if the world had forgotten it existed. This is a raw, real, and heartfelt story. No made-up endings, no perfect heroes, just silence, pain, and a whole lot of compassion. Proof that even in our fast-paced world, there are still people willing to stop, listen, and act. Today, you'll see how one simple act of kindness can bridge two very different worlds, the human one and the wild one. And maybe, by the end of this video, you won't look at animals the same way anymore. On a chilly September morning, with fog still hovering over the hills of a quiet rural town, life started slow, like even time had learned to take its time around there. Wooden houses sat tucked between ancient trees, and the only sounds were rustling leaves and the soft chirping of birds. Apart from the rush of cities, the wildlife and the locals had this quiet, almost respectful way of coexisting, like old neighbors who nod to each other without saying much. That's where we meet Officer John McCarthy, a middle-aged guy with a soft voice, a graying mustache, and eyes that carried more empathy than authority. John wasn't just the local cop. Folks called him the road's guardian, someone who knew every dirt trail, every face, and especially every creature that crossed his path. It wasn't uncommon to see him pull over to guide a lost deer off the road or nudge a turtle to safety. To John, wild animals weren't just part of the scenery. They were rightful residents of that place, silent members of the community who deserved respect. And when needed, a bit of human kindness. He'd say in his calm way, "Sometimes all it takes is one small act to change the course of a life no one notices." Pleas. That morning, like always, John was cruising down the narrow road that cut through the forest east of town. The radio in his patrol car hummed an old tune, and steam from his coffee thermos filled the cab with a familiar smell. Everything felt the same, peaceful, predictable, until a strange glint by the roadside caught his eye. It was small, dark, too still, something that didn't belong in the landscape. John eased the car to a stop. He stepped out, eyes sharp, heart already bracing for the worst, because he knew that in the quiet of the woods, wildlife sometimes called for help in ways that were easy to miss. What he saw, though, would turn that day into something he'd never forget. The morning breeze was warming up as John walked slowly to the edge of the road. The ground, still damp with dew, gave way under his boots. He crouched down, squinting to make sense of what he was seeing. Among the dry leaves and broken twigs was a tiny animal, motionless, trembling faintly, like it hadn't decided whether to trust or bolt. It was a bobcat kitten, so small it could fit in a kid's arms. Its eyes, wide with pain and fear, caught the soft sunlight filtering through the trees. Its paws were scraped, fur matted with dirt, and a small trickle of blood ran down its side. The scene felt out of place in the town's quiet routine, like a sad note in the forest's silent symphony. John stayed still for a moment, not out of doubt, but respect. He knew that in the wild, one wrong move could mean the end. Animals have their own survival codes, and there, in front of that tiny, vulnerable creature, a story was unfolding that he didn't dare rush. "Hey, little buddy, you're not supposed to be out here alone, are you?" he whispered, as if his words could ease the fear trembling in the kitten's fragile bones. The wind was the only reply. With almost ritual-like care, John inched closer, first kneeling, then slowly reaching out like he was offering not just help, but time for the kitten to sense he wasn't a threat. The bobcat didn't growl, Didn't run. It just looked at him, eyes too tired to fight, but alive enough to hope for something. Maybe a gesture, maybe a chance. That's when John noticed the marks on the asphalt. A faint drag trail. The little guy had tried crossing the road alone, maybe looking for its mom, or maybe running from something it had never understand. That road, so often harmless, now showed its hidden dangers and how fragile even the fiercest wildlife can be in the human world. John knew what he had to do. With gentle hands, he scooped up the kitten, wrapping it in his jacket to keep it warm. No sirens, no fuss, just the sound of the engine starting again, the patrol now redirected, not just a routine drive anymore, but a rescue mission. As the car pulled away from the forest, with the tiny creature resting quietly in the back, something in the air seemed to shift. Like the road itself knew a new story was just beginning. In the back of the patrol car, wrapped in John's dark blue jacket, the Bobcat kitten lay quiet. But it wasn't just any silence. It was heavy with something new, almost sacred. Like even in pain, that little wild thing was starting to sense it was safe. John drove slowly, one eye on the road, the other on the rearview mirror, watching the kitten's every move. His heart was still pounding, not from fear, but from something deeper, that strange feeling of being exactly where you're meant to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do. And that, he knew, wasn't just chance. When he got to the nearest police outpost, John didn't waste time. He called the local wildlife rehab center, a place where folks patched up animals hurt by roads, fences, or fires. It wasn't fancy, but it was run by big-hearted people who turned compassion into healing. While waiting for the team, John stayed by the kitten's side. He grabbed a water bottle and a clean cloth, gently wiping the dirt and blood from its fur. No words passed between them, just actions, and sometimes it's those quiet gestures that build the deepest bonds. The kitten, though injured, didn't try to escape. Its trembling body seemed to relax, like it was finally letting its guard down, just for a moment. Its eyes were half open, tired, sure, but also curious. There was a look there, part instinct, part surrender, that said something John couldn't quite put into words. Something like, "I feel like you're not gonna hurt me." The rehab center's truck pulled up in under 30 minutes. 2 techs hopped out with a special crate, blankets, saline, and medical gear. One of them looked at John and said something he'd never forget. It only made it this far because someone stopped. Most people don't. John just nodded. He didn't need praise. That moment was already bigger than words. The kitten was carefully placed in the padded crate. Before they closed the lid, John leaned in, looked into the little animal's eyes one last time, and whispered, "Get strong, little guy. The forest is still waiting for you." But what John didn't know was that this act, this touch of compassion, wasn't the end of the story, just the start of a recovery that would touch more lives than he could have imagined. The rehab center wasn't big or high-tech. It was simple. Dirt floors, light wooden walls, and the constant smell of eucalyptus mixed with natural medicines. But there was something you couldn't buy with fancy equipment: heart. Everyone there had a quiet mission: to save what the world's rush left behind. That's where the Bobcat kitten got its temporary name, Ash. It came from the dusty grey of its dirty fur, but also from the idea of rebirth, like forests that bloom again after a fire. Ash spent his first few days sedated, under close watch. His paws were banged up, he was dehydrated, and the scrapes suggested a nasty fall, probably while trying to climb a steep bank looking for his mum. But what stood out most was his eyes. Fragile, yeah, but burning with a restless will to live. The caregivers saw it right away. This little guy was a fighter. Day by day, Ash got stronger. He started with small twitches, then short steps in his little leaf-lined pen. His eyes, once dull, now watched everything closely. He recognized sounds, smells, faces. especially Clara's, one of the biologists who'd been with him from the start and refused to treat him like just another case. "He's got an old soul," she'd say, like he's been through a lot in a short time. Ash spent nearly 2 months in rehab. He relearned how to trust his paws, eat on his own, and react to threatening sounds. But what really hit home was how he watched, like he was trying to understand his surroundings, like he knew he'd been saved but wasn't sure why. Every afternoon, the team would gather quietly to watch him run in a small training pen, testing his reflexes, rediscovering his wild side. It wasn't just physical recovery, it was giving him back his identity. Right there in front of everyone, the wild showed it could endure, and when it met compassion, it knew how to say thanks, even without words. Ash was almost ready, and as spring crept closer, a question started lingering in the team's minds and in John's heart, who called every week to check on the kitten. Was he really ready to go back? The sun hadn't fully broken the horizon when John parked his patrol car by the trail. The sky was a mix of gold and purple, and the breeze carried the damp scent of a forest just waking up. Next to him was a quiet truck from the rehab center, and inside it, Ash. Strong now, ready. There was something special about that morning, like the forest itself had hushed out of respect. John walked to the back of the truck, and when the door opened, he saw the kitten, now a young bobcat, agile, alert, with bright eyes. Nothing like the trembling creature he'd found by the road. And yet, something in that gaze felt the same. Clara smiled, watching them. "It's like he knows," she said, "like he recognizes you." The crate opened, and Ash paused for a second, just one. Then, with the natural grace of a wild animal, he leapt out, landing firmly on the earth he came from. He walked off without looking back, fading slowly into the bushes, like an echo blending into the forest's song. John didn't say a word. He just stood there. No need for applause or medals. He knew what had just happened wasn't just a release. It was a story that'd stay etched where it matters most, in the invisible, in what you feel but can't explain. A gesture born of compassion that ended as a whisper from nature saying, "Thank you." And maybe that's the real meaning of the human-animal connection. Not a forced bond, not taming, but mutual recognition between species. The idea that wildlife doesn't need to be feared, but understood. And that one small act, like hitting the brakes on a road, can spark a change that shifts destinies. Ash went back to his world, and John to his. But there was an invisible thread tying them together. A thread made of respect, care, and something you don't learn in police academy, the courage to answer nature's quiet call when it needs you most. And so, the road became just a road again, but with a difference. For anyone who passed by with open eyes, that curve among the trees would never be just a curve. It'd be the place where one of the most touching stories of compassion and wildlife began. How many stories like this slip by unnoticed every day? How many small wild creatures cross roads, forests, and fences without ever being seen? And more, how many of us rush through our days too busy to notice when nature's calling out? Ash's story isn't just about a rescue. It's about the power of stopping, of looking, of choosing to do things differently even when no one's watching. It's about how the smallest gesture, braking on the asphalt, a compassionate glance, can be all a life needs to keep going. And now, I've got a question for you. When was the last time you really connected with something that couldn't speak in words? If this story hit you in some way, share it. Someone out there might need to hear it. And if you believe real connections between humans and animals can change lives, subscribe to the channel. Here, we give a voice to the stories nature whispers, and you're part of it.